Our journey began among forests, rivers, and mountains to understand how to reconstruct the ancient connections that once united the wild habitats of the old continent. However, the ecosystems of Europe and the world are not only interconnected by ecological corridors on land, but also by sea. There is in fact a complex system of underwater currents that are fundamental to the balance of our planet. Just as ecological corridors facilitate the movement of species, so too are currents the routes used by whales, sea turtles, and many others during their migrations. Furthermore, marine currents distribute the heat that our planet receives and the nutrients that the oceans produce. Europe is one of the continents that benefits most because the Gulf Stream gives it a much milder climate than regions at the same latitude. It also makes it rainier and more fertile. However, the Gulf Stream is currently disappearing due to the climate crisis. This is an observed and measured fact. The current is now slower than it has been at any time in the last 1,600 years, and recent studies indicate that it could disappear even in the next 50 years. For Europe, it would be the climactic point of no return, the event that would transform the continent irreversibly. The rest of the world would suffer the consequences, since it would trigger a chain reaction with unpredictable repercussions. It's not too late to stop all this, but immediate action is needed at both global and local levels. The whole world must commit to addressing climate change with the urgency that this latest warning demands of us. However, we must also protect the oases of biodiversity that still exist along the Gulf Stream from pollution and exploitation, so that, from them, a Europe of habitats can be reborn, capable of addressing the climate and biodiversity crises. This is our journey through these oases to understand their importance and interconnectedness and learn how to protect them in the face of the growing threats they face. We still have time to do it, but it requires a joint effort by all human beings and an awareness that, with natural habitats disappearing, the threatened species is now us. Our journey begins in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We are in the Azores. The islands have a dual nature. Above the surface of the water, they're an unexpected tropical paradise that grew on the ashes of the volcanoes that created them, many of which are still active. In Fayal, lush vegetation alternates with lava flows. Pico is a large volcano on whose slopes the forest climbs. Underwater, the Azores are instead the crossroads of the Atlantic currents, the point where whales, turtles, Portuguese man-of-war, and many other species stop to feed in migrations that are often thousands of kilometers long. The richness of the archipelago is fundamental for their survival, and this is one of the few places in the world where a few hundred meters from the shore, humpbacks, sperm and blue whales, as well as dozens of striped and common dolphins meet. We are in the Eden of the Gulf Stream. The disappearance of the Atlantic currents could, however, break this balance, disrupting rainfall patterns that make these islands so rich, and transforming them into deserts that already appear in the Canaries or in Andalusia. A fate that would touch both the emerged land above the sea and the ocean depths, with dramatic consequences for the species that find here a unique refuge in the entire Atlantic. This paradise, which bears little blame for the climate crisis, would suffer some of the worst consequences. However, there are even more immediate threats. The islands live in a delicate balance with tourism, but the desire to bring wealth to an isolated and depopulated archipelago could lead them to yield to the temptation of mass tourism, with irreparable damage to these very fragile ecosystems. The Azores must therefore be protected, not only with immediate climate action, but also by preventing the still pristine ecosystems from being weakened or even destroyed by human presence, so that they are ready to face the already present impacts of climate change. After the Azores, we continue towards the coast of Europe, making our way to Spain. We arrive at Doñana, the most important wetland area of our continent. Here, the Atlantic currents interact with the Mediterranean, encouraging precipitation and putting a stop to the desertification of one of the most at-risk areas of all of Europe. However, the deserts have already arrived here. Andalusia is already suffering from climate change more than most other regions in Europe. When we arrive, it is the hottest week, the hottest summer, the hottest year ever recorded in Spain. The climate crisis is already deeply affecting the Iberian Peninsula, reducing rainfall. 90% of Andalusia is at risk of desertification. But the blame is not only on climate change, but also on intensive agriculture that tries to squeeze ancient fossil water from Andalusian aquifers, water that has been untouched for tens of thousands of years. In Doñana, however, the situation is close to the point of no return. One of the most important wetlands in Europe has resisted exploitation and construction thanks to unique conservation efforts. But now it suffers from the theft of water by thousands of illegal wells that supply the greenhouses and plantations established in recent years. An already critical situation has become worsened significantly. The lagoons had almost never dried up in the last century, but this summer marks the third consecutive year they have been dry. But Doñana must not die. It is one of the few pristine habitats in Europe still alive, a refuge for thousands of migratory birds, a place that brings together many ecosystems and welcomes dozens of species: red and fallow deer, imperial eagles and griffon vultures, kingfishers and flamingos. And then there she is, the queen of Doñana, the Iberian lynx. Almost disappeared at the beginning of the 2000s, it is precisely from here that this subspecies has made its great return, slowly managing to repopulate the rest of the peninsula. An extraordinary success, but now indiscriminate water theft and climate change are putting it at risk. Immediate action is needed to immediately stop the exploitation of Doñana's water, so its resources are preserved solely for the survival of one of Europe's most vital habitats. Ecological corridors can be even more hidden than underwater ones. They seem invisible to our eyes, but are above our heads. Let's leave the marine currents for a moment and look to the sky. Let's go to the western French Alps in the Vercors massif, along an aerial ecological corridor that, if restored, would reconnect species crucial to the survival of Europe's nature. Here, we are at the heart of an ambitious project to address the almost irreparable damage caused by humans to some of the most vital species in European ecosystems: vultures. Species such as the bearded vulture or the griffon vulture have been the object of indiscriminate attacks by hunters and farmers, but also of indirect damage. For decades, they have been exterminated by gunfire and poisoned food by those who believed they were a threat to livestock for no reason, or simply due to superstition. Antibiotics and other medicines given to livestock have also contributed to their poisoning, as has the disappearance of their habitats due to human land use. But there are few animals as fundamental as vultures to the habitats of our continent. They act as nature's cleanup crew, removing carcasses and helping to prevent the spread of dangerous diseases, and are of crucial importance to a continent afflicted by increasingly frequent epidemics. Vultures are so efficient that they can spot a carcass from 100 kilometers away and immediately signal to others of their own kind. They are keystone species for entire ecosystems. Something is changing. The support of researchers, local communities, and recovery centers is allowing populations to return to health, and humans to successfully address the mistakes of the past. Here in the Alps, griffon vultures are now numerous, bearded vultures are on the rise. But this is just one stage. The goal is to create an ecological air corridor that will allow populations to be interconnected from Spain to Eastern Europe, making them more resilient to the threats they still face, most of which stem from human impact. It's a flight from the far west to the far east in search of Europe's missing vultures. We return to our journey along the currents, finally arriving in the country that benefits the most from them, the United Kingdom. Here we are at the center of an unexpected return of nature, which could be the key to preparing the country for the tremendous impact of a slowdown or disappearance of the Gulf Stream. A return that is happening largely unnoticed in places that were once among the most polluted in all of Europe. The Welsh coal spoils, ancient hills created by the accumulation of coal waste. We are in the Rhondda, a region of Wales once crucial for the extraction of coal that fueled the British Industrial Revolution. This was once an inferno of mines, chimneys, railways, and pollution that destroyed the original ecosystems of this part of Europe. Now that coal production has virtually disappeared, woodlands, green hills, and meadows have returned, reclaiming the place of ruined industries. And this is thanks to mushrooms. While coal waste may appear to humans as just a polluted site, for the mushrooms of Wales, it is a fertile ground to grow. In doing so, they have cleaned the land of pollutants and prepared it for the arrival of other species. Vegetation, then trees, finally fauna. Now the coal spoils have turned into a remarkably diverse set of ecosystems, which host species at risk of extinction in the rest of the country. And for this very reason, they could be the key to the renaturalization and protection of the biodiversity of the United Kingdom, where the disappearance of the current would resemble the frozen landscapes of Canada. However, it is necessary to protect this great return of nature, because many British authorities still consider the coal spoils as sites for reclamation and future development, such as housing and shopping centers. Instead, they will need to be protected from interference so that this small miracle of renaturalization can continue its course undisturbed. We cross the English Channel and continue north to meet the last wild soul of Holland, the Wadden Sea. It is an area that extends to Germany and Denmark, but which has a particular importance for the country. If dikes, canals, and agriculture have radically transformed almost entirely Dutch territory, the islands and tidal plains of the Wadden Sea instead guard one of the last natural ecosystems in this part of Europe. It is an extraordinary place, a wild area, even though surrounded by human activities such as agriculture and livestock. It is transformed every day. When the tide retreats, it reveals expanses of sand and mud that host a treasure trove of essential nutrients, not only for the birds that live permanently on the islands, but also for migratory birds. And here, every year, more than 20 million pass through. We are in fact at another crossroads of currents, not only marine, but also air currents, and species such as the wood pigeon, goose, and the white spoonbill find a fundamental refuge here in their journeys thousands of kilometers long. Among all of them, the protagonist is the black-tailed godwit. It leaves from West Africa, stops here in Holland, and leaves again for Siberia. It is a master in using the currents, and its journeys are so long that when it reaches its destination, it must replace a good part of its feathers because this very long journey wears them out. Without the nourishment it finds in the Wadden Sea, it would never succeed in its complicated mission. This is perhaps the best lesson on the interconnectedness of global ecosystems, which are linked by invisible threads thousands of kilometers long, and on the importance of their conservation. The Wadden Sea is threatened by industrial and agricultural pollution and by hydrocarbon extraction in neighboring regions. Its preservation is not only essential for the Netherlands, but also to provide essential help to migrants who are already suffering the effects of the climate crisis and the destruction of habitats in Africa, Siberia, and Central Asia. Protecting the Wadden Sea does not only mean protecting the ecosystems of Europe, but ultimately those of the entire world. Svalbard is the last stop on our journey and the one where the effects of climate change can be seen with the naked eye. Here, the rate of warming is 4 to 6 times that of the rest of the world. Every year, something changes permanently. The currents are perhaps the ones that have undergone the most obvious change. In 2006, strong winds from the south led to a sudden warming of the archipelago and moved the Spitsbergen current to the western side of the islands, the opposite side to where it used to flow. Since then, the fords on that side are no longer frozen. In a certain sense, Svalbard has already passed a point of no return. Here, we can imagine what would happen in Europe if the Atlantic currents collapsed. Wildlife is the first to face these changes. Polar bears are finding it increasingly difficult to hunt seals due to the disappearance of the ice. Reindeer are also facing big problems. Here, in winter, rain has arrived, never seen before in this part of the Arctic, which covers the snow with an impenetrable layer of ice that prevents them from searching for food. The risk that they will not find enough to survive the winter is ever greater. However, Svalbard is home to a unique biodiversity in Europe, which must be protected so that it can adapt to the changes imposed by the climate crisis. While Arctic foxes are almost extinct here in Finland, like few other parts of the world, thanks to the availability of ecosystems and the absence of natural predators. The islands are also a place that hosts walruses, seals, and a surprising number of birds, which benefit from one of the few places still largely untouched by the presence of man. Additionally, it is necessary that Svalbard remain uncontaminated, preventing large-scale tourism and the exploitation of resources that an increasingly accessible Arctic could encourage. We also need to understand the current impact of the climate crisis on the archipelago, so that it can serve as a lesson for what may happen globally in the coming years, allowing us to prepare adequately. Here, at the end of the current, we are already witnessing Europe's future.